Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Carlson, the chair of the Finance and Audit Committee. I want to welcome members of the Board of Directors. I want to welcome our folks in the audience today, and for those of you in the public who may be listening online. We're going to kick off our agenda today with a report on our half-year financial results. I'd actually like to welcome up Jeff Jones, I think for his maiden voyage in front of the OHSU Board of Directors as our new interim Chief Financial Officer. So, Jeff?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we hear me? Yeah, we can. So fortunately, for my first meeting, I had the distinct pleasure of presenting financials and operating performance that's trending positively for the year. And that really is through the dedicated and deliberate hard work producing stronger service line growth as well as managing costs deliberately and obviously, as I'll show you in these financials. We continue to face headwinds, so I'll touch on a few of those. I think healthcare is never without headwinds, despite some that might be behind us, and I'll review some of those as well as a reminder. And finally, we've been able to use this opportunity to do some foundational work in terms of bringing some compensation across our workforce up to, I'll call it market, and I think that's fortuitous for us. It's managing that deliberately as part of our imperatives that I'll also cover and get into. So with that, going. So I assume most people are looking at their information at their seats. So I'm going to start with the level setting on the 5 imperatives. I think they've been wordsmithed a little bit, but I think largely over the last 2 years, this has guided our efforts for the financial turnaround. Obviously, achieving strategic growth is important, particularly in complex, higher margin services. I sort of equate that in my language, just like we talk about working top license. This is really the enterprise working top of license, if you will, and what we're known for in our specialty care. The next few sort of go together, managing productivity in this growth period to meet our missions within our growth parameters, which is really the second one, is really targeting that to less than 2%, and I can show some of our trends in that regard. And also the disciplined targeting of benchmark salaries. I've already touched on some of that are behind us, and we've got a few more that are in front of us in terms of maintaining benchmark salaries foundationally for our journey forward. And then, of course, the opposite of that is making sure we secure the same for ourselves at OHSU in terms of rates from our commercial payers. We've got 2 contracts behind us, and we've got 4 in the current fiscal year that we'll continue to talk about in the future. So on to the performance. Operating income for the first 6 months from a pure perspective is $122 million, which is $145 million above our budget. So that's phenomenal, and that really reflects what we already talked about and the efforts over literally the last 2 years, and I get the pleasure of presenting that, if you will. One factor, it doesn't include commitments. I'll call it sort of like a subsequent event that you might hear from our auditors. So something that has happened, not in our financial statements yet, worth disclosing because the final contract with AFSCME was ratified in January. So we've made an adjustment to the tune of an estimated amount of $50 million. And that really is to give you an honest reflection of what we think the performance might be and the run rate going forward. It's only adjusted at the bottom line. It's not a component of the individual financial statements you'll see, but you'll see it adjusted at the bottom in some of the numbers I'll go through. And real quick, before I get into the details, the main drivers, as you'll see, operating revenues are up 16.3% year over year, and operating expenses only 12.6%, including that item in this regard. So that differential really drives the performance improvement. And we'll get into that a little bit more. I've got 2 views of the financial results here, one more graphically for those that are inclined to that approach, and one more the numbers for those that are inclined to that. But real quick, you can just look at the trend in revenue, about $90 million up. You'll see on the next page specifically, and how tight the expenses are in the middle. That produces the total expenses that are still below budget, and our revenue is $90 million above budget. And I think the takeaway is the far right, where you hear forever, particularly in not-for-profit accounting, slim margins. And I think you can see our slim margins. Even when they're at benchmark, which is getting up to the 4%, they're going to look slim relative to our enterprise. And that's just the reality we live in, but it's necessary. And I'll cover that as well. I'm looking up and pausing in case there's any questions. Feel free to raise your hand. Here's the numbers view. And the first gray bar, you see operating revenues up 90 million, 16.3%, numbers you've already heard, and operating expenses unadjusted for that $50 million. So they would literally be right on budget if we adjusted that above number. The only adjustment is down below, just to show the adjusted operating margin at the very, very bottom, second to last line. Our budget was a 0.7 of a margin loss, and the actual is the 2.3% operating margin. There's your 3% pickup, and I think that's the remarkable piece that ties back to what we just talked about. All right, this is a great bar graph for me, the new guy sort of catching up with the financials, the pre-COVID good old days, if you will, when things were stable and high performing. Then you sort of look at the bumpy period during COVID. The positive years were probably more associated with FEMA and CARES Act money more than anything else. So it's really, it would have been a series of losses if not for those amounts as well. And then really in 24 and 25, that's when we had the, I'll call it the presumptive charity. I don't know the bill number, as well as some of the mandated staffing. So those are the headwinds you faced more regionally or within the state that have continued to challenge your efforts over these last 2 years. And again, we do have continued challenges moving forward. So once we get through that is what you really see the movement to the 2.3% margin. And then looking back, I have to remind everybody that margins are important. We toured the New Vista facility yesterday, and I know when this board approved that construction and launched that, it was back in the good old days. And you know, we dedicated $350 million worth of debt financing, and the rest we were going to finance with our consistent and positive performance. Well, that dynamic changed, and of course, that's affected our cash and our days cash, which I'll get into as well. But that's the important thing, getting back to that so we can continue to move forward, expand programs, modernize our facilities, particularly as we move the oncology population to their new quarters. All right, the broad high-level drivers. Inpatient admissions are slightly down. You're really managing within capacity. You'll notice the average daily census just under 500. That's I'll call that full, if you will, as I understand it. So the average length of stay was really what filled that up, and that's driven by the acuity, which is the case mix index, the first line item in the last group. Case mix is just your average acuity. I'm sure we all understand that, but it reflects how we get paid as well. But when acuity is up 3.8%, generally speaking, our compensation or our revenue, if you will, our reimbursement is up by 3.8%. So that's the primary driver of reimbursement benefits, shows the complex care, as well as the length of stay. It sort of explains the length of stay, if you will, more than anything. Surgical cases are also up 1%. If I had an inpatient, outpatient, it's about a third, 1/3 inpatient, 2/3 outpatient. And I understand inpatient has gone up 2% and or twice, if you will, the increase on the outpatient side. So that's pretty substantial. You know, there's always a trend to outpatient over these last few years, but this just says that consistent with the other complex care discussion, inpatient surgeries are up faster, if you will, than outpatient surgeries. So that's a good thing to maintain.
Jeff, are you
Yes.
anticipating seeing a blip in our third quarter numbers when we open Vista Pavilion, both in terms of those front-loaded operational costs and then, you know, bringing those additional beds online?
Definitely. We have started recruiting those 350 estimated in my materials from the budget ramp up for FTEs. So as that transition takes effect, you know, there's an immediate movement of all those patients. It's just how fast you sort of free up new capacity.
Are we feeling confident that on the costs as we're going out and hiring and recruiting for those positions that they're going to reflect what we budgeted this past year?
I'm not confident yet. You know, it's difficult to ramp up in this environment to the extent that we need. So we'll let that play out a little bit, and that's one of the things as part of the budget process that we'll continue to report out as well as the performance. Yes, Derek, did you want to say something?
I just want to clarify a couple things. So yes, we're excited about opening in April for Vista, but keep in mind we need to make the prior space in adult OHSU ready to then move the cardiac and neuro business, and it won't be an automatic switch, so we want to do it visually.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to add, I think it's 60 beds that increase capacity immediately because we're taking out a few units for their modernization refresh. Thank you, Derek. And then again, the outpatient share of activity continues to be strong. So it's growth across the enterprise. This is just another example, sort of the, I'll call it, the effect of the focus on the complex care. And you really see those, the top grouping, non-hospital pharmacy, professional, which is imaging and labs and things like that. It's really related to, particularly oncology, the renewed focus on oncology, getting ready for that move. There was a rededication of beds, if you will, to the oncology program over the last year. And that's what's really showing up. And the downstream or even upstream services associated with that are really reflected here. There is a mistake. I think we lumped imaging lab and surgeries all together in the 13% bucket, but you can see it's actually 16.7 down below. But the message is still the same. They're related to, if you will, dedicated complex care improvement services are reflected here, and that's really driving substantial growth. This is just to show that the ambulatory sites continue to grow over a 10-year period as well, with a little bit through COVID hiccups, and you know, with one exception. Obviously, we believe there's potential for continued growth in the ambulatory space in the market. So this is just to show there's strong history. Sometimes it's a leading indicator of our inpatient volumes and the like. So it's important to pay attention to this. Work on access and all the things that we are focused on. This is a representation of our payer mix over a 10-year period, and the message here is it's stable. You look down at the bottom, our commercial or managed care population stays stable during this pretty steady growth, which is super important. Cautioning that with the ACA subsidies, Affordable Care Act subsidies expiring, this is the cautionary piece where we'll continue to look at that commercial as people choose not to renew or can't afford their premiums anymore. It may impact this, hopefully slowly, but we have yet to see how this will begin to play out, because it doesn't appear there'll be any changes to the path forward out of Washington. Then you see the next bar is the gray. Above is the commitment to the state Medicaid, which is substantial for us, as well as Medicare above that. Next one is just the FTE chart. The gray line is last year's growth. This is calendar year by pay period. So you've got the gray line, which is, again, calendar by pay period, and the blue line, which is the current fiscal year. So you see the growth a year ago up till about the middle of the year, and then it really levels off nicely, and it's really has stayed flat since then. Again, I'd love to keep presenting this, and we'll start to be able to drill in what's related to new capacity openings and what's related to same store, if you will. So we'll bifurcate that for you in the future, hopefully, and so we can continue to monitor the individual costs associated with that. Is there a premium, to answer your question, Jim? Or are we able to accomplish this pretty consistently with all our recruitment and retention efforts? So I talked about downstream on our cash position, which is really, really important. In fiscal year 25, cash dropped by $250 million. The current fiscal year, it's up $300 million, which is really, really good news. And it's a combination of the investment returns, which land below the line, you don't see those, as well as the positive operating performance, and a catch-up of the QDP, qualified direct payments, which is our indirect governmental transfer program, Medicaid program here in Oregon. As a result, days cash on hand increased 137 to 151. Now, that seems small, but when the enterprise grows at 10% plus, it takes $100 million just to keep your days cash flat. So it's really, really important to acknowledge that. Just maintaining days cash is, in a growing enterprise, is a difficult exercise. And we've done that and added to our days cash. And then there's sort of a balance sheet perspective. We'll call it net worth, to sort of give you an indication of how that performance is impacting what we call net worth. And to make it easy, it's just what you own less what you owe. We continue to invest in our property, plant, and equipment, but we also continue to depreciate. So it looks like a small number, but that's because depreciation gets netted into that $34 million growth in what we own, if you will. Our interest in the foundation, the $80 million, we also pay down debt on a regular basis, so we owe less, so that's a positive number. And then the working capital number, which is really a catch-up on the IGTs. We accrue that, so it shows up in accounts receivable, and that's really the driver of that. And down below is the same number, if you will, sort where does it come from on the income statement, which is largely from operating income and investment return, again, below the line numbers, as well as foundation gains. Yes, Jim?
Yeah, Betsy?
Yes, please. How are you tracking deferred maintenance?
We have what's called, all the capital lists. So this is infrastructure capital. We hear things like the cafeteria. On the tour last night, for example, you understand our capacity to serve our patient population is challenged. So we track that in terms of our desired spend when we have the opportunity to. So it's a pretty comprehensive list, everything from roofs and parking garages to cafeterias, patient-focused and employee-focused items. It's pretty comprehensive. And then we talk about what comes next, what can we afford to do next. A one-page snapshot of our investment portfolio, if you will, as well as the return. The takeaway here, and this is helping, as you just saw, both in, net worth as well as our days cash. Year to date, it's returned 6.2%. You've got the benchmarks, you've got the mix to the right, foundation mix on the bottom, more heavily allocated to equities, where we're 50-50 after rebalancing here on the primary enterprise, if you will. The top left, just want to say that those indexes are year-to-date indexes. They're not for the same period that you see in terms of our performance. Those appropriate benchmarks are associated in that table down below. I think I've covered the days cash, if you will, but there's a reminder here, the dotted lines are sort of the medians we aspire to get back to. So we'll just keep sharing those with you and our progress towards, if you will. Okay, in summary, and to remind us of the persistent headwinds, we talked about the ones that are, quote, behind us, if you will. They're part of our run rate in the presumptive charity, as well as the mandated staffings and other challenges. But, you know, HR 1 has been passed, which determines how the feds fund Medicaid, broadly speaking, in particular Oregon. We'll see how that plays out. Already talked about the ACA subsidies that have gone away, if you will, and how that will play out over time. And of course, we'll get to report back to Jim's question. In a highly competitive and challenging environment, are we able to hire without substantial inflation? We'll begin to report that out and see how that looks. But generally speaking, it's still a substantially high inflationary market. Significant uncertainty surrounding, you know, those direct federal payments and the implications on the state budget are sort of yet to be determined, yet to be seen. And there are others, I guess is the way to put it.
Is there, excuse me, is there any value in stress testing that uncertainty, or is that something you're doing?
Yeah, we're doing some sensitivity, as well as are there strategies, particularly on the ACA. That's the one that's starting to play out now. It's really difficult in terms of the implication on the state budget. We'll continue to do that. As we know more, we'll share more, if you will, in terms of our sensitivity analysis. But the Affordable Care Act subsidies, you know, it depends on who's receiving care and how it's also supported by the state, if you will. The ability to get Medicaid, which is another issue. Qualifying and remaining qualified for Medicaid, those rules have changed as well. The work requirement, as an example. And I really want to end with the imperatives. I already mentioned, particularly in the bottom bullet, securing those payment rates that reflect our unique role, but it's important to add, and commensurate with the inflation that we are experiencing. We've really got to keep that balance. There's a bit of a recovery to reflect our unique role as well. So I think the 4 contract negotiations will continue to share those results with you throughout the year, but that continues to be a focus of ours as well. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Perhaps my question is embedded in one of the imperatives. I'm not able to tease out the nuance.
Okay.
But where is any comment on looking at our current portfolio and seeing what things we should continue to do and what things in a cost-constrained environment we perhaps should not do? Or that we should share costs more broadly if there's a regional benefit? Why is it that OHSU would be absorbing the full cost of some activities that have a community benefit versus looking for partners to share those costs with? And I just don't see anything about a review of cost containment in the imperatives. And perhaps it's there and you just need to take my hand and lead me to it.
Yeah, and maybe in the form of follow-ups as well. But clearly the focus on the new capacity is where we begin to at least looking forward. What we are committing to is the service line growth. We'll be very deliberative in that regard. What we're not going to do, I can't speak to that personally. Maybe that might be a follow-up, but those are always a challenge. And with our partners, that's the only one I've understood, is uniquely putting low acuity services wherever possible in our partner facilities. So that's important in terms of the community burden, as well as freeing up space for the high level services we provide. I don't know, Tarek, if you wanted to add any insights on.
Thank you. I think it's an excellent question. And yes, part of the work that our team is beginning to do is to really zero in and unpack all those community partnerships and making sure that it's a win-win for us, as well as Jeff mentioned, ensuring that we're putting things in the community that make sense, such as maximizing or optimally positioning what we do at HMC, Hillsborough Medical Center, for example, in partnership with their team and their board. Saw that as very active, while we also look at how we can continue to serve our community in the non-acute care space in ways that make sense. And I think there's a lot more work that our team is focused on in that space as well.
I take it, if I may, one step beyond the care space, but also what I'm characterizing, and this is my nomenclature, community activities that when we were flush with money made lots of good sense. And as we're not, and everybody's looking to economize, do we take a very serious look at all of the activities? And I'm just going to pick the provost's office because when I saw that org chart, I was astonished that there were that many elements in it. When do those all get scrutinized very carefully to see if they're achieving their goals, if we're carrying a disproportionate burden of the cost of those activities? What's the ROI for them in terms of benefit to OHSU versus an overall kind of community feel-good activity that perhaps we just can't afford anymore?
Understood. I think we remain very committed to where the need is greatest in our community and where we can best make an impact on those needs. So I think your question about are we really looking at what true impact is sustained by some of these investments and making sure that we remain committed to those that are making an impact. And also we're going to discover new ones, as Jeff mentioned, as the ACA and Medicaid become strained. What does that mean for more and more people not having access to care? And how do we pivot those investments and those partnerships to do that?
Thank you.
Yes.
Maybe this is a good time to ask this question. My question is about net patient revenue specifically. In the last fiscal year, in fiscal year 25, net patient revenue grew by about 12%, and in these 6 months, it's grown by 23.5, almost twice. Can we dig down a little bit? I was going to keep this question for the end, but after Betsy's question, this seemed like a good time to ask this one. Can you dig down a little bit and explain what this increase is composed of?
Sure, and it's really across the enterprise. Specialty pharmacy is a great example on one of the charts. When I talked about upstream and downstream, there's been continued huge growth in the specialty pharmacy space as an example. But when you open up, there's a pure price component to that. There are inflationary components to that, albeit small, from Medicare, nothing from Medicaid. You get inflationary increases. So let's talk about the price increases that we put on our charge master. Some of those are realized largely in the commercial space. You get the inflationary pieces as a component to each of those contracts. So that's the pricing side. And then you add that to the volume that you see. And when you see case mix, there's case mix growth. That's a 3% growth. Generally speaking, 3% plus component to that, in addition to the volume piece that you saw as well. So I can give you a better breakdown, but that's largely the breakdown of the various components.
I believe Dr. Selden has
And mix, of course.
a quick comment on the response to.
Yeah, thanks for that question, which is really important. And there are already some contract increases as well. And so there's many components to this. I just want to take the opportunity to thank all of the nurses and docs and technicians and other folks at OHSU who, without any change in footprint yet until the new tower opens up, have really created a tremendous amount of productivity increase, not that I see at other institutions within a static footprint. And that bodes really well for the new tower because we have a lot of work to do. We have people who are really dedicated and working hard, and we have a lot of people in Oregon who need us. But many aspects of what's happened and that yielded this productivity, let me put a little color around that. The CMI is very high, the case mix index, in other words, the complexity. And that does lean into our strategy, which the state needs us for, to care for the very most complex patients with leading edge therapies not available elsewhere. that also have significant financial underpinnings, but it means that what we're doing in our hospital is for sicker patients and more complex patients than in our history, and even than most academic health centers in the country. And so there are knock-on consequences. We really also have an amazing primary care function and service, which touches to a great degree on underserved and at-risk populations. And so keeping space for that, making sure that our learners actually see the full breadth of standard and advanced care, which has future workforce implications. And we have some of the best health systems researchers here, so we have to make sure that they, that work is done here because they are studying and improving it, not just for us, but around the country. So all of these things are dramatic changes compared to our history, and they're really good in a way, but we have to watch the unintended consequences and manage those as well. Thanks for the question.
So you would say that this is organic growth? We can expect this to continue? Certainly the efficiencies and the inflationary increases in remuneration, that will continue for the rest of the year and ongoing?
So I think our demand growth is organic because our folks, and again, my personal thanks to them, are doing great stuff and offering really amazing options for patients here. There is increasingly a lot of structure that the members of our teams have put in place in order to be able to meet those needs, to program, to shift capacity to certain areas of the enterprise and certain physical areas in the hospital. So in order to operate at this level of efficiency, there is a lot of structured work going on. I would expect continued strong growth, but I don't think any institution has seen growth necessarily at these levels in a sustained way. On the other hand, we're opening a tower, so we need to continue to model that
Right.
out.
Well, I would characterize it as follows. As Nate says, we'll see continued volume growth. However, given the constraints we described earlier with Affordable Care Act and Medicaid constraints, the amount we're going to get per patient or per stay will absolutely be strained and reduced. So you'll have this growth trajectory while the reimbursement is moving this way.
I believe Ms. King.
Thank you, Jim. I actually have two questions, if I may.
Absolutely.
Unrelated questions. I'll take the easier one first. And I'm looking at page 14 of my hard copy under asset allocation for the OHSU held funds. I'm interested to know, not that we're comparing apples and apples, but similar organizations to ours, which I realize we're the only one of in Oregon. Is that the asset allocation that is typical? And second part of that question is, how frequently is that allocation reviewed?
So the allocation varies depending on your time horizon and your uses of the cash. So as days cash come down, as a practical matter, you'll keep more money in the more liquid space because you might have a need to use it, and sometimes having to do that in a period, a poor timing segment of the market is difficult to do. So no alternative type investments that are really, really difficult to unwind, whereas the foundation has the capacity to do that, so their policy is going to be different in that regard and can exercise more of that. I can't say how often the policy is reviewed. I can follow up with that, or I can look to my colleague Malene behind me, because we know we rebalanced it to the 50-50, but that's to get to policy. And how often is that policy reviewed? That's a great question. Yeah, so it's an annual process, as he says, as a management team. And again, if days cash are low, we're going to keep it at this allocation because that's important to serve the needs of the organization if something should happen in a market that we can't predict yet. Yes.
Second question?
My second question, Jeff, isn't necessarily for an answer today, but productivity, is a very charged word, particularly as we're seeing, increased acuity of patients in some cases. So I'd be interested, as you get more time with us, to understand a little bit more in maybe your next report or a following one about what are the metrics within the productivity that we're tracking. I mean, I'm used to things like hours per patient day and all of that kind of thing in the clinical setting, but I'd like to know a little bit more about it.
And my partner, Tarek, we're doing just that. So we look forward to being able to share some of that with you. Go ahead, Tarek. Sorry.
Thank you. Excellent question, Susan. And I would say we're getting better and better at how we measure productivity at the same time while measuring things like burnout based on how much extra shift, premium pay that people are depending on, or we're depending on candidly in order to meet the needs of our patients. So we're trying to be able to develop our staffing model to be able to meet that in a measured way. So all that's very ongoing, as you'll see in a future month's reporting.
Thank you. And I'm interested in productivity across the enterprise. Of course, my knowledge base is around clinical practice, but
Yeah.
I'm interested in the broader. Thank you.
Do we have other questions? Yes, Chris.
This is building a little bit off of Chair's question, but how sensitive is the cash on hand to the investment returns? Is that being fed just by the OHSU held funds, or is it the entire investment portfolio? And in terms of that asset allocation question, the risk, the liquidity of the portfolio the risk goes up and the liquidity goes down, and the foundation held funds, but it's underperforming its benchmark by 120 basis points. You don't seem to be getting paid for the greater risk in that, the significantly greater risk in that portfolio. The OHSU held funds did better. Is that a concern, or is there kind of a longer time frame that you're observing or modeling for that?
The second question, you'll have to remind me on the first one again.
First one
I
had
haven't
to do with
participated.
how sensitive the cash on hand is to those numbers. Sorry.
So the second one, I haven't participated in a foundation review of on their committee just to understand the nuances of their performance and some of the long-term nature, if that's the case, or how the market's concentrated. The equity market, as you know, is concentrated to certain stocks and how they're allocated. So the information there, I don't have good insight to at this point why they're below quote their appropriate benchmarks. We count in cash.
I don't think it's not necessarily why they're below. It's more how impactful that is. How
and
bothersome that is to you.
Yeah, we don't count the endowed assets. Obviously, all of them are important, but we don't count in our cash numbers the endowed assets. And I presume, not knowing completely, and Malene can probably confirm that's where they probably allocated some of those investments in some of them potentially underperforming, but I don't know that. Yeah, and it doesn't include.
Marlene, you want to come up table if you got a comment? No?
But he was confirming first that our days cash does not include that endowed number for sure.
Okay.
For the record?
Oh, for the record, I'm Patel, Finance.
You're too difficult to hear, please.
Mike.
Oh, Moline Patel, SVP, Finance and Treasurer. So the sensitivity is lower based on that. And all of our OHSU held funds, the 50/50, is very liquid, invested in ETF funds that are highly liquid, and obviously it's a barbell strategy. The foundation funds are more illiquid. 74% is in equity, and the majority of that is in private equity and hedge funds. And so it's, when you look at our portfolio as a whole, between the foundation and OHSU health funds, it's pretty much benchmark for academic health centers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have other questions for Mr. Jones? Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question about virtual visits. Is that something that OHSU is encouraging, increasing? What is the financial implication of that?
It allows us to do more work on a limited physical footprint. So I think it is helpful. The reimbursement is not as high. It's better if you're video rather than voice only. We have very robust systems in place. this was underway at OHSU, fortunately, thank goodness, when the pandemic hit. And it was just incredible how the folks who do this work in the institution were able to ramp up. We stayed, roughly speaking, around 20%. And it is incredibly helpful to our patient population, some of whom are challenged in travel and can get at least aspects of it. But as we come out of the pandemic, there is risk and then backing away from tamping down on either funding or regulatory for some of these functions. And it's difficult to do for out-of-state patients. So there are inherent limitations.
Other questions for Mr. Jones? I'd like to thank you both. I'm glad on your first trip before the board, we had robust questioning on a variety of topics.
Thank you.
I have just two comments I want to make before we bring up Mr. Marshall, Mr. Holmes. First one is I want to acknowledge and thank the hard work and productivity of our staff, our clinicians, our faculty, our executive leadership. Our former chair of the Finance and Audit Committee used to say, everyone's got a strategy, but can you execute? And year to date, we are executing. And so I just want to thank and acknowledge all that hard work, because a lot of this is, flat out managing our costs and increasing productivity, which are two very positive indicators. The second comment I want to make is, while I'm cautiously optimistic about the performance year to date, I think Mr. Jones pointed out we've got significant exposure and potential headwinds, both with federal and state policy. The full board's going to hear later today from Ms. Hanna, and she's going to talk about things at the state level. As we operationalized and absorbed the staffing legislation and the financial assistance legislation, those were two big financial hurdles we had to overcome. And we were generally supportive of both of those initiatives, but that did hit us pretty hard financially. The second one is we have significant exposure at the federal level still on Medicaid, on NIH for vital research dollars, and frankly on the 340B drug pricing. And so this is an excellent report. I'm glad we're doing a great job keeping disciplined on our financial imperatives, but I'm still at this point pretty cautiously optimistic and don't want to ignore the potential exposure we've got at the state and federal level. So thank you both for your presentation.
Mr. Chair, one
Yes.
other item, again, it may be embedded, and I'm going to plead being, having newbie status, but it occurs to me that if we don't keep up with some of the technological requirements for just running an institution this big, whether it's fiscal management, whether it's patient management, I don't know where the schedule is for projected or anticipated capital investment in those mechanical things that allow us to run this institution with both accuracy and integrity.
Yeah, if we might, that might be an issue we'll put on the list. Nate, do you have a quick response? Because I want to make sure we're giving adequate time here for our second agenda item for Mr. Marshall, Mr. Holmes. But if you've got a quick
thank you.
comment.
Very, very quickly. So we do have the assistance of an external firm that brings certain technical expertise in specific areas to our financial improvement process. And I think one of the principal reasons that the specific firm was chosen, and they're working well with us already, is that they have a deep background in information technology infrastructure for business systems and in healthcare. And so we are very much looking towards their projecting, planning, helping us with ROI on exactly those investments and where we need to start in a capital limited environment, which we're still in. Thanks. It's a really good question.
Also, I hope doing susceptibility to all of the external hacking forces and the rest of it, I see the vulnerability at the state system and the failure of the state of Oregon to invest in a timely way to keep up with required IT, which simply results in making us more and more vulnerable.
It's an excellent point, and I hesitate to say this without knocking on wood.
Don't say it.
But OHSU has had strong systems in place. They actually report up to our CFO and spends a lot of it. I know as an observer spends a lot of attention on it. It's incredibly important in healthcare for all kinds of reasons.
Thank you. I'm going to thank you both. I'm going to ask Tim Marshall, Joe Holmes to join us, and they're going to speak to us about the Audit Advisory Services update. Welcome.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Tim Marshall. I'm the Chief Integrity Officer at OHSU. And just from a reporting structure, Joe and the Audit Advisory Services team reports up through me from an organizational chart perspective, but also I want to emphasize that I provide oversight for this function because I want to make sure that they maintain their independence per their standards. So again, they report to me, but I provide oversight and advisory services to him from an independence perspective. And lastly, we do have a dotted line to this committee, so thank you, Chair Carlson, the opportunity to speak with you today. And I also want to make sure that you understand that you also provide oversight for this function at OHSU to maintain, again, their independence, but also the great work that they're doing. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Joe.
All right, thank you, Tim. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on audit and advisory service activities. For the record, my name is Joe Holmes, and I am the Director of Audit and Advisory Services here at OHSU. As always, please feel free to ask questions at any time. We'll begin with a progress update on the FY26 project plan, followed by the recommended updates for Q3 and Q4. I'll then provide an overview of our risk assessment and project planning process, including the frameworks that guide our work. After that, we'll review the updated risk assessment themes that have emerged over the past 2 quarters. And I'll close with a brief summary of other miscellaneous activities. Before diving into our FY26 plan progress, let me quickly highlight for everyone that our projects follow 3 distinct phases. Each project moves through planning, fieldwork, and reporting stages, ensuring a systematic and consistent approach to our work.
Excuse me,
Yes.
would you mind pulling the microphone a little bit closer to you, please?
Oh, sure. Yes. Is that a little better?
Much.
Gotcha. All right. To date, 2 projects in the FY26 plan have been completed and several others are nearing completion. All projects listed here are targeted for completion by the end of the fiscal year. We have also reserved time for follow-up work on open findings from prior audits, which is an important part of ensuring that corrective actions are implemented. Two projects are currently being performed under privilege at the direction of legal. We are also planning to move forward with a budget walkthrough project. This topic has been on our watch list for some time and presents an opportunity to deepen our understanding of OHSU's budgeting and financial processes. Budget and resource constraints are recurring themes in our risk assessment discussions, so this work will help inform future planning. The final 3 items on this slide represent emerging areas of risk. Our primary objective with each is to gain a clearer understanding of how these risks are being managed today. Depending on what we learn, these may evolve into more formal audit and/or advisory service engagements. We also have 2 projects that are currently paused. The first is our planned work around managed care contracting. We are pausing this engagement to allow time to assess potential overlap and collaboration opportunities with the current Premier consulting engagement. Similarly, our Vista Pavilion work is on hold, but will resume with advisory service work focused on final closeout and expense capitalization. Our semi-annual audit plan is built on a risk assessment process aligned with COSO and the IIA's Global Internal Audit Standards. COSO guides how we identify and assess risks in achieving objectives, while the IIA standards require that our plan remain risk-based and aligned with OHSU's strategy and governance expectations. The project plan is rolling, allowing us to adjust as risks evolve and to deploy A&A's resources where they provide the most value. It's important to note that A&AS is not OHSU's enterprise risk management function. The themes we identify are not exhaustive or ranked. We gather risk insights through interviews, document reviews, and consultation with external colleagues, supplemented by lessons learned from prior audits and investigations. This work will continue throughout FY26 with a focus on identifying areas for the project watch list. COSO emphasizes that clear objectives are essential for effective risk assessment. While OHSU's updated strategic plan is in development, we have been working closely with management to understand current operational priorities, regulatory and compliance obligations, financial reporting requirements, and emerging initiatives. We maintain a risk assessment participant register that currently includes 98 individuals across all missions. Over the years, this rolling process has generated more than 700 entries in our register. The updated project watch list and risk assessment themes reflect near-term focus areas. When we evaluate potential projects, we apply criteria aligned with COSO and the IAA standards. We look at process maturity, the history of errors, and prior audit results. The availability of reliable data and whether other assurance partners have reviewed the area are also taken into consideration. These factors help us to determine not only where the risks are, but where an audit is practical and likely to produce meaningful value, especially in areas that are new, subjective, or undergoing rapid change. This slide reflects current thematic observations and risks. Alignment and prioritization of efforts will continue to be impacted while the long-term strategy is under development. We continue to see opportunities to better connect operational performance with financial reporting, and oversight remains decentralized in several areas, creating fragmentation. Leadership transitions continue to affect continuity and timely decision-making, and resource constraints and competing priorities have delayed resolution of known issues. And finally, vendor oversight remains an area where due diligence and ongoing monitoring could reduce operational and security risks. Beyond our core audit work, we've been involved in several important initiatives. We're developing AI capabilities through an LLM prompt library, piloting the internal OHSU chat tool, and maintaining active involvement with professional organizations. We're also proud of our continued engagement with local universities through our academic outreach efforts. So with that, I'll open the floor to discussion and happy to take any questions about anything I just presented.
Yes.
My question is about financial alignment, where you say that improved reconciliation between operational performance and financial
Yes.
reporting is needed to more effectively manage the bottom line. So how are you going about that process?
Yeah, so that's an emerging risk area where we've observed, kind of similar to your question previously, around, it's wonderful that we have positive financial results throughout the first half of this year. Being able to be precise and pinpoint, like, well, what did we do operationally to actually move the dial? Like, which areas are actually performing better? What did we do differently, like, over the last 6 months to improve? And then similarly, if we're having negative financial results, do the teams in the operational areas know, like, were they contributing to that negative margin? And basically, the risk is to ensure that, the great work that we're doing on a daily basis, how does that correlate to positive financial results or negative financial results? And at times, we're just seeing, just gaps in our abilities to directly understand on a timely basis, what our operational activities are doing to directly impact positively or negatively the bottom line.
And just as one more item there, that we're also seeing inconsistent behaviors across the institution. Like somebody might do it this way, somebody else might do it the other way. So just trying to bring a little bit more consistency to application of process and bringing that information forward so that we can kind of deliver on similar processes throughout the organization.
And the last point to how we address that within our projects, we ask questions around, like, what type of financial reports do you run on a routine basis? How do you reconcile your operations with reporting? And wherever we see opportunities to better connect those dots, we offer recommendations to those teams.
And is this an ongoing project, or is it something?
So this is like a thematic risk that's kind of embedded with every project that we work on. So if we're engaging with whatever the subject matter is or whatever the department is, we're going to ask those questions. It's like, you understand that you're receiving financial results, like what type of reports do you routinely run? And how do you, like, again, correlate your operational performance with what you're seeing on the numbers?
Yes.
In looking at this updated risk assessment themes and observations, I guess what I'm trying to dig into is, I understood in answer to the last question what it is you're doing about it, but the one that I'm curious about is executive turnover and leadership transitions. I'm thinking about what all has happened in this institution in the recent short term. Dr. Jacobs' departure, Dr. Elna Hall's arrival, the $2 billion night gift, the new organization at night, a new foundation director, Statham, Goldfarb, and Fernstall all gone. and hiring and firing decisions that have spilled over into the public square. And so who exactly are you advising on some of these risk assessments, other than just listing it and saying this is a problem? Who owns the solution, or who owns the work product to try to figure out how detrimental are some of the recent changes here? And I may be overstating, but in my observation, the changes here have been profound. And I just want to know who owns that.
That's a great question, and I appreciate the questions. And with all due respect, like the Finance and Audit Committee actually owns a portion of responsibility to kind of monitor these risks. As Tim mentioned, like we have a dotted line reporting structure to this committee. So reporting out on these types of risks actually lands with everyone at this table here. With that said, we do have an executive level steering committee that we report out on a quarterly basis, these risk themes. And in terms of like who's actually managing and owning like these enterprise level risks, to be blunt, that's actually a little bit of a gap where we do have, maybe perhaps some opportunity to more formally manage these enterprise level risks. Our team, we're a team of 2.8. We identify things, and the core purpose of what we do for risk assessment is to identify projects to work on. But at other institutions, perhaps there's a more dedicated enterprise risk management function that would be kind of owning and managing.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Sue?
So what I'm hoping is that you could dig into the decentralized oversight and governance a little bit for us. Just curious, there's rework there, there's GAP. Who is, overseeing that? What is the crosswalk? How you're identifying where those things are occurring? And maybe even help us understand the timeline for when that can be resolved.
Yeah, I don't think I could answer the timeline of when that would be resolved. I think some of it's inherent to just our organizational structure and how we operate as an institution where, a lot of wonderful things happen at OHSU due to the autonomy and the ability that we grant to our departments and divisions to make decisions and own their own processes. What that results in, as Tim alluded to it, is at times some inconsistency and lack of standardization on how processes are run. And when you try to govern inconsistent processes and you have like, maybe perhaps the ability to govern, you have to learn each area individually. So within our projects, the clinical variable pay is a good example. It shows up on our project plan as one line item. However, really within that, you could parse it out. It turns into potentially like 4 different audit reports because each team that we work on, we're only working with 3 different teams, and all 3 do, have their own processes that are very different. So we end up having to spend a lot of time just learning multiple different variations of processes. And what that manifests as like decentralized governance, it's like, well, how do you govern, have a consistent governance expectation when everybody's kind of having a little bit of a different flavor on what they're doing? And we acknowledge it's like every team needs to have some capacity to make decisions, to do things the best way that they need to do it. But when you try to roll it up, it makes it harder then to have governing expectations. So like the timeline to resolve that one, I can't answer that question for you.
Fair. Thank you.
Justin? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify earlier, Betsy, you asked a question about who's ultimately responsible on these executive issues. And I think that you did a nice job of talking about all the different nuances that could be around that. But ultimately, that's our job, right, as a board, is what my statement is on that. And that is that, we're here to hire and fire the president, and the president has to have the right to run and manage his executive team and the organization. But ultimately, because we make that decision, it's ours to own.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Yeah, Chris?
How much work do you do? It seems like this executive turnover and leadership transitions issue could spill into all of your other themes and observations in different ways. How much work are you doing to understand the interplay, the impact to kind of spill over from these things?
And, I don't think we have a dedicated project on the plan to look at as an example, executive level turnover. I think what we do within the scope of each of the projects that we work on, we would look at either how are expectations currently set, and maybe perhaps contrast that with previous leadership. And I think what we're doing is like that transition in terms of like executive leadership, strategic alignment. I think the risk there is more around the prior Finance and Audit Committee presentation that I spoke at back in June, there's some questions like, well, how do you prioritize and identify what work to work on? And it's like, well, absent a clear strategy or clear like strategic objectives or where we're going as an institution, in addition to, the strategic priorities shifting and strategic turnover, that results in us, at times kind of wondering like, well, what are the priority projects for us to work on? And so the turnover in leadership, that kind of manifests with different departments and teams wondering like, well, what are the most important things we should be working on? I think at the departmental, divisional level, we have great leaders that are providing, that are in place and providing leadership. But when we start to look at the very top, like what are the most important things across the institution, that's where we start to kind of have maybe perhaps some variation, some additional clarity that hopefully will be provided by the long-term strategy.
And just to follow up on that, one thing that we will also want to do is as Tariq and some of these new, Jeff, we had a great conversation with you a couple of weeks ago of just introducing ourselves, the work that we do, and bringing some history perspective for you as a new leader at OHSU. I think that's going to provide a nice little bridge to the future as we can help continue to support the functions and OHSU as a whole as we move forward.
Excellent. Tim, as always, I appreciate the professionalism and the thoroughness of our program integrity and our audit departments here, and excellent presentation today. One thing I will say, I'll be interested in Tariq and Dr. Selden. We paused the managed care contract compliance objective because Premier is going to be looking at that. I'll be very interested in seeing what work Premier comes up to in regard to rate adequacy, our claims denials and appeals rates, what that looks like, and just how well we're doing on our internal systems, really, and processes monitoring that. So I don't need any comments on that today, but that's something I'll look forward to hearing about in the Premier report.
Spot on. And I would add on top of that, important, at least from my point of view, is a consistent Medicare compliance program.
Yeah. So with that, I believe we will have the committee adjourned. We don't need to take any action. We'll have just a brief report out in the full board meeting later this afternoon. So thank you both.
Thank you.